Here's your report.
Thanks, Jane. I wish I could hire a whole team of yous.
Try posting a job on LinkedIn. It's the world's largest professional network. Unlike resumes, LinkedIn gives a real-time view into a candidate's skills, experiences, and more.
Let's do it. You're irreplaceable, Jane, but another you would be great.
Find your perfect match with LinkedIn. Post your free job at linkedin.com/achieve. That's linkedin.com/achieve. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello. Welcome to Strong Sense of Place.
In each episode, we focus on one destination and discuss what makes it different than any other place on Earth.
Then we recommend 5 books we love that took us there on the page.
I'm Melissa Jolan.
I'm David Humphreys.
We're going around the world, one great read at a time.
Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Strong Sense of Place. Today we get curious about the cemetery. If you're listening to this on launch day, Mel and I are well into month 2 of our spooky season celebration.
Best time of the year.
Yep. Today in Two Truths and a Lie, we will talk about a mass transit system for the dead. And then we'll talk about 5 books we love.
I'm recommending a novel about 2 ghosts who find love in a cemetery in the Bronx.
Oh, that's nice. I've got a book that will help you prepare for wearing the pine overcoat, signing up for the silent majority, going cold turkey on your oxygen habit. Today we're going to go dark. Let's start it up with the Cemetery 101.
First things first, let's talk terminology.
I'm ready.
In conversation, cemetery and graveyard are often used interchangeably.
Yeah.
But there is a difference. A graveyard is a burial ground that's associated with a church. A cemetery is not. We're going to come back to that.
Okay.
In the Middle Ages, powerful and wealthy people were buried inside the church, maybe a crypt under the floor.
And still are. If you're the Queen of England, you're being buried in a church.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the hoi polloi were interred outside the church, in the churchyard, which became known as the graveyard. By the early 19th century, small church graveyards were filling up, what with all of the tuberculosis and cholera and typhoid fever.
And the general explosion of the population itself.
Exactly. So they needed to make room for new souls in that consecrated ground.
Yeah.
Sometimes the bones were just disinterred and moved to ossuaries. An ossuary is a chamber for storing bones. Sometimes they're fancy, like the Paris catacombs or the Sedlitz ossuary here in Czech Republic.
Yeah.
In most cases, the problem of overcrowding was solved by building a cemetery. That is a larger burial space that was more like a park with rows of plots, and those were usually placed outside the town center and not affiliated with a church. So, graveyard, smaller, higgledy-piggledy, church. Cemetery, larger, symmetrical layout, not a church.
If you're looking for a more intimate place to view the dead, you might head to a graveyard. If you want a nice place for a picnic, perhaps a cemetery.
Nice segue. Although we tend to think of graveyards now as a place that's reverent, maybe a little spooky even. In the Middle Ages, a graveyard was used as a venue for fairs and markets, and sometimes they even grazed cows there.
Wow.
The farmers thought that the grass from the graveyard produced sweeter milk.
That is hard to get my head around. Although I do like the idea of incorporating the dead into the local festivals.
And that idea that hanging out around tombstones wasn't weird came back around in the 19th century. Cemeteries by then were like gardens. They had big grassy lawns and majestic statues and shade trees. There were bees and butterflies, foxes, deer, and most importantly, it was quiet because it was outside the bustle of the city.
And I expect a lot less polluted once you get outside of the city proper.
Right. Cemeteries became a fashionable place to see and be seen. In 1860, the Greenwood Cemetery in New York was competitive with Niagara Falls as the most popular tourist attraction in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah. On both sides of the Atlantic, families strolled along the lanes among the Gothic tombs and Egyptian-inspired mausoleums. On birthdays, anniversaries, or just a really nice day, they'd settle down on a blanket with a picnic basket. Beef sandwiches, ginger snaps, and fruit were really popular.
Okay.
And these picnics were a way to socialize with people you knew and also to meet other people. It was like a real social scene. So you could make new friends while you were paying your respects to the dearly departed.
Go and cruise the cemetery.
I don't think they called it that. In the late 1880s, a young man told a newspaper reporter, "We're going to keep Thanksgiving with our father as though he was as live and hearty this day as last year. We've brought something to eat and a spirit lamp to boil coffee."
A spirit lamp to boil coffee sounds like they were making coffee for a ghost.
I mean, they kind of were.
Yeah.
I should also mention that it is not uncommon to celebrate the Mexican holiday Dias de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, with a picnic at a family member's graveside. From October 28th through November 2nd, families honor their departed loved ones by cleaning their graves, decorating them with candles and marigolds, singing, praying, and feasting on tamales, hot chocolate, sugar skulls, and a traditional sweet bread called pan de muerto, or bread of the dead. I like the rhyme.
That sounds like a really nice way to honor those who have come before us.
It does. I don't know why we don't do that more often.
Yeah.
Famous cemeteries like New Orleans St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 and Père Lachaise in Paris have pretty much always attracted tourists. Père Lachaise gets 3.5 million visitors each year.
Wow.
That's the same number of people who visit Musée d'Orsay.
That's amazing.
A few weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal published an article about the current rise in cemeteries as destinations for date nights and tourism. Cemeteries all across the United States are throwing community picnics and hosting garden tours. Some have artists in residence, and there are even movie nights.
That's such a fun idea, having movie night in a cemetery.
In Los Angeles, when Paul Rubens died, there was a special screening of Pee-wee's Big Adventure in the cemetery.
Aw.
Why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer.
I didn't realize that we're kind of tombstone tourists until I started counting the burial spots that we visited.
Yeah, we've been to a number.
We have. We went to the Paris catacombs and did the tour there.
Yep.
And the Sedlitz Bone Church multiple times.
The Sedlitz ossuary is an amazing space, and we will put pictures up. It's hard to describe, except I will put this out. There was a dude a couple hundred years ago, I think, maybe 150 years ago, who looked around and saw these bones and said, "Oh, I can craft with these," and did that.
Very artistic.
Yes.
We've had memorable walks in Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And Père Lachaise. Here in Prague, we've been to the Old Jewish Cemetery, which is amazing.
It is.
Olsztyny Cemetery, that's where Franz Kafka is buried. And the Vyšehrad Graveyard.
We're regulars at the Vyšehrad Graveyard.
We are, like, almost every day.
Yeah. It's in the middle of a lovely, lovely park we've talked about a bunch of times, and we will frequently walk that space and more often than not cut through the graveyard.
I know some people think that visiting a cemetery might be kind of morbid or creepy, but I like it as a way to learn about history and connect that to real people. A historian who gives tours of London cemeteries said that he thinks cemeteries are museums of people, which I thought was really lovely.
Yeah, that's a nice framing, isn't it?
So I'm going to share some highlights from 2 historical cemeteries in Europe, one for daytime and one for night.
Okay.
The first is Père Lachaise. I am not going to be the only person recommending that you take a tour through Père Lachaise. That was the first cemetery that we visited together, and it was on our first trip to Paris together in 2000.
I remember that trip. That was very nice. We walked through the cemetery, and then afterwards we went to this very French cafe where there was no English spoken, and we managed to navigate through lunch. We had a lovely omelet.
I remember that omelet so vividly.
And some potatoes.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the nice things about visiting cemeteries is it's very life-affirming.
It is very life-affirming, and they're often in neighborhoods that are not touristy.
Yeah.
So if you go for a stroll and then go to have a little lunch after, you're probably going to be among locals.
Yeah.
And maybe a ghost or two.
Maybe somebody will come with you to lunch.
So Père Lachaise is laid out like a city on a grid.
Yeah.
It was established in 1804, and it was the first garden cemetery in the world.
So it sort of started the trend.
It did. The day that we visited was a perfect fall day. It was pleasantly cool and a little overcast. The cobblestone paths were covered in gold and orange leaves that were crunchy under our feet. And there was hardly anyone there. Do you remember that? It was really empty.
Yeah.
I can still kind of hear our heels clacking on the stones and rustling in the leaves. And it felt spooky and peaceful at the same time. Many, many famous people are laid to rest in Père Lachaise. You can visit the graves of people like Edith Piaf, the singer, author Marcel Proust, Marcel Marceau, the mime.
As loquacious as he's always been.
The actresses Olivia de Havilland and Sarah Bernhardt.
Yep.
And of course, Jim Morrison of The Doors.
Yeah. One of the nice things about visiting cemeteries now is that you can use your phone to sort of relive their work while you're there. Read a little Proust, hear a little Edith Piaf, hear a little Jim Morrison.
Yeah, when we go to Vyšehrad, sometimes I like to listen to the Moldau by Smetana because his tomb is there, and they actually have the first few notes of the Moldau engraved on his headstone.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
There was a time when The Picture of Dorian Gray was my favorite book. So one of the graves that I was really excited to see in Père Lachaise was Oscar Wilde's tomb. And it did not disappoint. His monument is this very large, impressive Art Deco flying sphinx. It's carved from 20 tons of limestone. And I read that it was dragged from Derbyshire to the artist studio in Chelsea by 12 horses.
12 black horses?
I mean, probably. Oscar Wilde famously wrote, "A kiss may ruin a human life." And his tomb is covered in red and pink lipstick marks from fans kissing the stone.
Yeah. I've heard that in LA, Marilyn Monroe's grave has been kissed pink
It's
over
really
the years.
sweet.
Yeah.
That day in Père Lachaise, I also learned the story of Eloise and Abelard. Do you remember this?
I remember the names, but I don't remember the story.
It's a medieval story of ill-fated love. Eloise was a young noble lady. The much older Abelard was hired to be her teacher. They fell desperately in love and were married in secret. When her uncle discovered their union, the bride was sent to a nunnery, and Abelard committed himself to being a monk.
Super uncool people.
They lived the rest of their lives apart. But now, they lie side by side together in a small Gothic chapel.
Ah,
The two lovers often wrote poetic letters to each other, which you can find and read online. And now it's tradition for modern romantics to leave letters at their graveside.
oh, that's nice.
It's really sweet.
Yeah.
I have another tale of undying love that might be even sweeter.
Okay.
This one takes place at Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, which, by the way, is said to be the most haunted graveyard in the world.
It certainly feels it.
It really does.
It's got a strong creepy vibe going on.
Even during the day,
Yeah.
but at night.
Yeah. And we were lucky enough to get an Airbnb that had a window that looked out over the graveyard.
We did. And Greyfriars is open 24 hours a day. So you are invited to go in there at night.
Whoa. I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was founded in 1562 during the reign of Mary, Queen of Scots. And its first inhabitants were thousands of victims of the Black Plague of 1568.
Oh, yeah. They had a rough time of it in Edinburgh.
They did. Many of the gravestones and monuments in Greyfriars are decorated with dancing skeletons, hourglasses, and wilting flowers. Those are all memento mori, reminders that no matter what we do in life, death will meet us eventually.
Yeah.
Life is fleeting, and we'd best make the most of it while we can. So, we did take a very memorable night walk in Greyfriars Kirkyard. I had recently read 2 books that are set in Greyfriars before we went on that walk. City of Ghosts by V.E. Schwab. In that one, the main character has a big showdown with an angry ghost in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And the other one was a melancholy ghost story about true love called Soulmates from the Gothic story collection Haunted Voices. I talked about both of those in our Scotland episode, and they were very fresh in my mind when we went there. I'm predisposed to scaring myself with my overactive imagination anyway.
And it is easy to do in Greyfriars Kirkyard.
It was awesome.
I'm not sure. It's just this combination of, for me, it's the combination of them not being scared of death imagery, like you mentioned, the dancing skeletons and whatnot. It's in the middle of the city, so it's surrounded by walls, and it's surrounded by windows that produce light, which means that in the graveyard, it looks particularly dark.
Yes, it does.
And there are some really interesting shadows being cast.
It's true.
Yeah.
It was windy the night we were there.
Yeah.
So the soundscape was really good.
Yeah.
And that kind of made the shadows move a little bit. Very atmospheric.
Yeah.
And we were with our friend Tilly.
Yep.
And I don't know why, but the 3 of us were whispering, which always makes me feel a little bit on edge.
Yeah.
But it also would have felt wrong to speak in our full voices.
It seemed appropriate.
So like the back of my neck was, as I'm talking about it, the back of my neck is tingling a little bit.
Yeah.
And as you alluded to, like during the day, it's a little spooky, but it all looks really cool.
Yeah.
And then at night, it's straight up scary.
Yeah. Also, like, it's not really well traveled, but there are some people there. So at night, there are people in the distance moving around, and you can sort of see their shadows and maybe their light, and maybe hear some sort of reflected laughter off of the buildings around it.
And then they disappear.
And then they disappear.
There are also the mort safes.
I don't remember the mort safes.
Okay, so starting in the early 18th century, medical schools needed bodies to teach anatomy.
Right.
And grave robbers, called resurrectionists, were their suppliers.
Yes.
Mort safes were the metal cages that they built on top of graves to keep body snatchers from getting into the graves.
Yes, but they look like they're there to prevent the corpse from getting out.
Exactly that. So you're just walking down your spooky graveyard path, and then you see a cage over a grave.
Yeah, and you wonder what they're keeping in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I promised you a love story.
Oh, yes.
And I keep my promises.
Okay.
This story begins in 1850 when a gardener named John Gray arrived in Edinburgh with his wife Jess and son John. When John the Elder couldn't find work as a gardener, he joined the Edinburgh police force as a night watchman. I can only assume that the nights were chilly and lonely and long.
Sure.
So he got himself a companion, a Skye Terrier he named Bobby. These little dogs look like scamps. They're low to the ground and they have longish hair with oversized ears that stick up at angles, like they might rotate like a satellite dish.
Yeah. Yeah, they sort of cock as you're talking or something.
Yeah. And they look like they're always ready for an adventure.
Yeah.
John Gray and his little dog Bobby became best friends, plodding along the cobblestone streets, keeping Edinburgh safe. But 8 years later, on February 15th, 1858, John died of tuberculosis. He was buried in Greyfriars, and his dog Bobby refused to leave his side. Through rain, snow, and sunshine, he stayed at the grave. When the city passed a law that all dogs had to be licensed, the Lord Provost of Edinburgh himself presented Bobby with a collar and a brass tag that read, Greyfriars Bobby from the Lord Provost, 1867, licensed. Bobby presided over his master's grave for 14 years.
Wow.
That faithful little dog was buried just inside the Kirkyard gate, not far from John Gray's grave when he died. His headstone reads, Greyfriars Bobby died 14th January 1872, aged 16 years. Let his loyalty and devotion be a lesson to us all.
Oh, that's a really nice story.
The following year, a life-size statue of Bobby was placed in front of the Kirkyard to welcome everyone who comes to pay their respects. And his little nose is very shiny because everyone who walks up to him gives him a little boop. That's the Cemetery 101.
That's really nice. I'm about to say 3 statements. 2 of them are true. 1 of them is not. Mel doesn't know which one is the lie. Here are the statements. Statement number 1. In the Victorian era, London had a train line for the dead. Statement number 2. There's a 14,000-year-old pet cemetery. And statement number 3. There's a joyful cemetery in Central Europe.
Once again, they all sound true.
Starting from the top, in the Victorian era, London had a train line for the dead.
True.
That is true. In the mid-1800s, London was getting large. They had 2.5 million people, which I'm going to guess in the mid-1800s felt like a whole lot of people. And of course, many people eventually means many dead people.
Mm-hmm.
And the graveyards and cemeteries were packed, sometimes 5 or 6 feet above the level of the sidewalk.
Wow.
Yeah. Gravediggers complained to the House of Commons that there wasn't anywhere to put the newly dead. The advice from the House of Commons was to chop up the old bodies.
Ew.
Yeah. And they did that.
No.
Yeah.
No, they didn't.
They did.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So eventually a plan was made to develop a new huge cemetery on the outskirts of town.
Thank goodness.
Yep. They got wind of the Pére Lachaise thing and were like, we're going to get one of those. And they did. Big, beautiful place to spend eternity out in Brookwood. It's still there. It's still one of the largest cemeteries in Europe. The only problem was that the new cemetery was 23 miles from London, about 37 kilometers.
And that would take a long time before cars.
Yes. A horse-drawn funeral cart would make that trip in about 12 hours.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. I'd hope we could do the burial and return to London for tea. We cannot. It's a whole day thing. So the answer was a train. We'll put the dead people on a train. And that ooged people out for some reasons you might think and others you might not. First, people were a bit upset about the idea of sharing a train with a bunch of corpses, even if they were in a different car. But people also had thoughts about mixing dead people of different social classes and religions in the same car on the way to their final resting place.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't have time to talk about is how the very large cemeteries had subdivisions where you were buried with people like you.
Yes. Some people's bigotry extends into the grave.
Mm-hmm.
I am no longer alive, but my intolerance marches on. Mom would have wanted it that way. So that's when a train line opened up specifically for the dead. And it had a name. It's a great name. It was called the London Necropolis Railway.
That's like the title of a series of novels right there.
There is a novel with that name, yeah. It had its own carriages and timetables. There were 6 different categories of tickets for the living and the dead. Mourners would ride along to the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
Coffins were segregated by religion and congregation. Until the rails were extended into the cemetery, the train would be met at a station by a team of black horses and carriages. After they extended it, there was a station for Anglicans and one for non-Anglicans in the cemetery.
Of course.
Yeah. The London Necropolis Rail ran until World War II.
Stop it.
Yeah. The station was bombed and service stopped, and motor cars took over after the war. And that was the end of the most fantastic Goth transportation service of all time. While we're on the subject of Victorian deaths, I should mention that there was at one time a store in London called the London General Mourning Warehouse.
Wow.
Yeah. It sold all the types of goods needed for funerals and elaborate mourning in the Victorian era. I'm picturing Amazon, but for Miss Haversham. Dr. Frankenstein needs a new coat.
Lockets for your snippets of hair.
Yes.
Mourning cards.
Yes.
Black handkerchiefs.
One more cousin dead from consumption. What am I going to wear? Statement 2. There's a 14,000-year-old pet cemetery.
True.
That's the lie, but it's only kind of a lie. We don't know when we domesticated dogs, but it was a long, long time ago. It's estimated that people have been walking with dogs for the last 30,000 years.
That's really nice.
Yeah, that's before agriculture. That's before domesticated cows or sheep or goats. The glaciers hadn't retreated yet. It was a long time ago. Back when I imagine the world was frequently scary and freaky and mysterious, we weren't alone. The number, the 30,000 years, comes from looking at when dogs and wolves started becoming genetically distinct. And, bonus fun fact, the domestication of dogs seems to have happened simultaneously in different parts of the world.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So people worldwide and in their long-forgotten ancient languages said, "Who's a good boy?" That's right. You are. Want to go for a walk? Grandma? To the park? Let's go. The earliest domesticated dog that we're sure of is from about 14,000 years ago. In 1914, some miners were cleaning up a mine near Bonn, Germany. They found some bones. They called the local university. Eventually, they unearthed a man who's about 40 and a woman who's about 25. And at the time, in 1914, they thought it was a wolf. And then in the 70s, someone did some sciencing and was like, this is a freaking dog. The dog was about 7.5 months old at the time of its death. It would have looked a lot like a young gray wolf. It had clearly been cared for. The couple had some other things, like an arrow and a little sculpture that looks like a moose and something that might have been a hairpin. And we don't know anything about the circumstances of their deaths or why they were buried together. But the man, the woman, and their pet dog have been there since the last ice age.
So cool.
Yeah. So, while we've had humans buried with their pets for the last 14,000 years, that wasn't a pet cemetery, but only presumably because the couple wanted to be buried with their best boy. Statement number 3. There's a joyful cemetery in Central Europe. So, as we know, that's true, but it's also only kind of true.
Sneaky.
Yeah. There's a cemetery called the Merry Cemetery. Or at least in English, it's in Romania. I don't know if I would describe the emotional takeaway as merry, but we'll get to that in a minute. The story starts in the 30s. There's a woodworker in a village in Romania. I think his name is Stan Ion Patras, but I'm probably mangling that. His family had been making tombs and wooden crosses for generations. If you're a Romanian villager in that area, they're the family you'd go to for that. They've got a workshop right on the side of the cemetery there, and it is still there. Around 1935, Patras had a thought, and the thought was, why so glum? Why do cemeteries have to be weeping angels and skulls and so gray? And why do they have these empty epitaphs? Rest in peace, beloved husband. We know he wasn't a beloved husband. It's a small town. Everybody knows he wasn't a beloved husband. Why can't we just speak the truth about the people we knew? So he starts carving a different kind of cross. They have an image of the dead person in their life along with a short poem that tries to capture their voice or something about them, something true. Patras carves them and then he paints them. The predominant color is this bright blue that really defines the cemetery. But he also uses vibrant accent colors, yellow and red and green and white, little black. The crosses all tell different stories about the people who are buried there. Some are working in a field or cooking or leading a classroom. They might have a bit of Mary to them, particularly with the bright colors. I think the colors are doing a lot of work there. Others show the moment of death. So a carving of a guy who ran his car into a tree.
Whoa.
Or a man being shot by soldiers in a foreign land.
Yikes.
Yeah, less merry. The poetry, though, is challenging emotionally, which you might not get if you're an English speaker in that graveyard because it's all in Romanian.
Right. And is he writing the poems? Okay.
Yeah. But, you know, this is a village in Romania and whimsy is in short supply. So one doctor's grave starts, "For as long as I lived, I could not imagine being anything other than a doctor. I treated many patients, and I got rid of their disease, but I myself, I could not escape, and a serious illness put me quickly into this grave. Here's another. This one was written for a little girl who was hit by a cab in front of her home. And before I read this, you should know that Sibiu is a city in Romania. Her cross reads, "May you burn in hell, taxi driver from Sibiu."
Wow.
Right? In all of Romania, you could find no other place but here, near our house, to stop and hit me and bring grief to my parents. Shaking your fist from the grave.
I'm into it.
Yeah. So the truth-telling catches on, right? The woodworker Patras made the crosses until he died in 1977. By then, he'd carved 700 of them.
Wow.
He passes the work on to another woodcarver and then another after that. And there are now over 1,400 bright blue crosses sharing the stories of the people buried there. I feel like the people who call this cemetery Mary are the same people who think Born in the USA is a patriotic song. It's definitely an attempt to reframe the idea of a cemetery.
Sure.
Mary. Patras is, of course, buried in the cemetery he made famous. He wrote his own cross. It reads, "Ever since I was a little kid, Stan Eos Patras was my name. Listen to me, my good people, because I will tell no lie. All the days I've lived, I wished no harm to anyone, only good, as much as I could, no matter for whom. Oh, this poor world of mine, living through it was so hard." If you want to visit this Mary Cemetery, stop by the show notes. We'll tell you how to get there, and if you can't get there, we'll show you some video. That's Two Truths and a Lie.
Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing, it's precision-crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision-crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
Here are 5 books we love, nothing better than.
Here's book 1.
My first recommendation is a classic, The Woman in White, written by Wilkie Collins in 1859. This book is considered among the first mystery novels, and it's also one of the first Victorian sensation novels.
What's a sensation novel?
It's a genre that combines suspense, melodrama, and scandalous plot elements like bigamy, potions and poisons, disguises, evil aristocracy, fraud, murder, madness, jealousy, love triangles, and general sexiness.
Wow.
One definition I found said sensation novels combine romance and realism in a way that strains both modes to the limit.
So do you have anything like that now? Sort of melodrama, maybe?
I mean, I think the closest thing might be a soap opera or a telenovela on the screen.
Yeah.
But I have a hard time thinking of a modern book that does it this well.
Yeah. What about Riverdale?
Riverdale. Yes. Good example.
Over the top to the extreme.
And this book is a masterclass on how to go over the top in precisely the right way. It includes all of the things I just listed, and it cloaks them all in a delicious Gothic atmosphere.
That's exciting.
It's very plotty, but it also has really good character development.
That's an impressive piece of work for the mid-1800s.
I mean, Wilkie Collins, pretty damn good.
Knew what was going on.
Yeah. The story begins in the very best Gothic tradition, at midnight on a desolate road lit only by moonlight. Humble art teacher Walter Hartwright walks along a path outside London, lost in thoughts of his travels the next morning. He's been hired as a drawing teacher for 2 half-sisters who live at their uncle's stately country manor called Limmeridge House. As Walter lingers at the crossroads, a young woman dressed entirely in white materializes from the shadows and lightly touches him on the shoulder.
Does she really materialize or she walks out?
I mean, she walks out.
Okay.
But he doesn't see her walking.
Oh.
He just feels the touch
Okay.
on his shoulder. And he turns, startled, and she's beautiful. And she says to him in a tremulous voice, "Is that the road to London?" With those 6 words, Walter is swept into a perilous mystery that will change his life forever.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're on like page 8 right now.
It's like page 3. Okay, so although she appears to him like an apparition,
Yep.
we learn almost immediately that she is no ghost. She's a real woman who's escaped from a nearby asylum.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. He helps her into a carriage and they part ways. He's troubled by this,
Sure.
but the next morning, he goes on his new adventure, and his attention is now consumed by his arrival at Limridge House and the introduction of his students. Marion is forthright and thoroughly modern. Her half-sister Laura is lovely, ethereal, and dreamy. He becomes fast friends with Marion and falls hopelessly in love with Laura. But alas, their romance is doomed from the start. Laura is promised to a baronet and fated to spend her days living at the baronet's manor house, the portentously named Blackwater.
Oh, that sounds bleak indeed.
Mm-hmm. Walter's thoughts return again and again to the woman in white. In true Victorian fashion, a handful of coincidences connect his new acquaintances to the woman in white, and it becomes pretty evident that the baronet has a dangerous secret that he will go to all lengths to protect. Walter becomes determined to unravel these mysteries.
Well, that sounds great.
This story is wild. It's got the vibes of a ghost story, but the perils are not supernatural. All of the scary bits were everyday elements of the Victorian era. For example, their lives were lit only by candles or gaslight, so it's perpetually shadowy. If you were in peril, you didn't just pick up the phone and call 911. The only way you could communicate with people was to write them a letter. Maybe you could send it special delivery so it would get there faster, but anybody could intercept it or read it and put it back in the mail.
Yeah, even before it got out of the house, somebody might fish it out and take a look.
Exactly. Proving your identity could be really tricky business. The world was still 2 decades from photography being common, and ID cards weren't even issued until the early 1900s. So proving who you were
Right.
was impossible. All you had was people who could vouch for you. What if they lied? Sort of related, women could be locked away in a lunatic asylum by their husbands or their fathers if they were embarrassing or inconvenient.
Yeah.
All of that and more comes into play in this book, including false identities, eavesdropping mistakes, secret meetings, portentous dreams, a deadly fire, and breathless declarations of love. If you are not sold yet, here are a few more things you should know.
Okay.
The plot is revealed through the testimony of various witnesses. So it's all written in the first person, but with different narrators. Each one picks up where the previous left off to move the story forward. So they're kind of passing it like a baton. We start with our heart rate hero, Walter, then a kindly lawyer, then Marion, and then it just keeps going. Even the tombstone in the churchyard delivers a crucial line in the narrative.
Really?
Yes.
Does it get its own chapter?
It does.
Whoa, he had a tombstone narrator in 1850? That's amazing.
This story was originally published in weekly installments in Charles Dickens' magazine All the Year Round, 1859. It was such a massive hit, it was published as a complete novel the following year. An English writer and politician named Edward Bulwer Lytton, and a real stick in the mud apparently, said it was, quote, great trash. Dickens called the book masterly, and Prince Albert loved it so much he gave copies to people as gifts. This is an excellent read on the page, but I recommend the audiobook, narrated by English actor Ian Holm. He played Bilbo Baggins in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies. His voice is very warm and rich, and he gives each of the narrators a unique sound without really putting on fake voices. So when he's reading Marion's bits, he's not trying to speak like a girl.
Right.
But he does give her a different tone of voice so that you know it's her. Because this is a Victorian novel, there are a few spots where Wilkie Collins' prose can get a little thorny. Sentences get a little long, get a little lost in the clauses. But having Ian Holmes read it to you smooths over all of that.
Yeah.
So you can just be swept up in the story. And because it's all in the first person, that works really, really well. If you want to feel righteous indignation at the 19th century treatment of women, while figuratively strolling in a cemetery swirling with mist, this is the book for you. It's The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. There are many stage, screen, and radio adaptations of this story. I will put lots of links in the show notes in case you want to experience this in a multimedia way.
Here's book 2.
Before I get started talking about this book, I want to mention it's about dying. If that seems like it might be heavy for you, you might want to skip 4 or 5 minutes ahead in the podcast to the next book. My first book is Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them by Sally Tisdale. Sally Tisdale is an award-winning author. She's won the Pushcart Prize and an NEA Fellowship. She's written for The New Yorker and Harper's. She can absolutely write a sentence, tell a story, bring a great quote at the right time. She's also a nurse. She was a palliative care nurse in Portland for over a decade.
Ooh, that's a tough job.
Yeah. This book is a collection of advice for dying people and for people who take care of dying people. This book looks death straight in the face. And I'm not going to lie to you, it can get a little heavy. This will not be most people's pick for reading in the doctor's waiting room, although that would be funny. This is a pretty thorough look at death from sort of months ahead of the event through the actual death itself, through grief and ceremony and on to life without. The book feels like you're going on a trip with a friend who's been there before. It's mostly practical, but there's a lot of recognition of the full emotional spectrum that comes along. She goes through the specifics of what to expect as death nears, what to do before, how to talk to the dying, what are your options for handling the body after death. There's a death planner in the appendix, so you're encouraged to write down everything from whether you want your body to go to science to who you do and do not want to see when you're dying to what kind of music you'd like to hear. And the author has opinions about the process. Tisdale starts with the idea that recognizing death as an inevitable part of life can improve our lives. Just on a personal note, this has worked for me. Mm-hmm. When used properly, recognizing death has increased my gratitude for being here now. Tisdale talks about how, at least in the U.S., we make death weird for children, and then that sets us up for a lifetime of being weird about death. And maybe we should stop that. We should normalize death. One of the strongest threads in this book is about how many of us hold an idea of the good death, the death in bed at home with no medical instruments around, surrounded by loving family and listening to the music of your choice and watching the sun play through the heather in the window or whatever. And how that's a fantasy that many of us won't see for many reasons, starting with the basics of, do you get to choose your death? Many people do not, and you never know. At the same time, she recommends setting the intention, knowing what you might want, but knowing that you might not get it, getting ahead of one's death or the death of others who are important to you. Also important is recognizing that other people might have different ideas about how they want to die. The author has a bluntness about her that is refreshing. She starts the book with the lines, "I have never died, so this entire book is a fool's advice. Birth and death are the only human acts we cannot practice."
Nice.
Yeah. The book is full of advice on how to treat and talk to dying people, but also what not to say. Don't say, "I told you to quit smoking."
Oh my gosh.
Right? Don't say, "Are you sure the doctor knows what he's talking about?"
Oh, come on.
Don't say, "You meant so much to me."
Oh, it's so sad.
Right? Some of these seem really obvious, but I can also understand why it needs to be said.
100%.
Yeah. A couple of times she gave a directive that I wasn't sure how to follow. She writes, "Be honest about your own emotional state without burdening the sick person." And I thought, I have trouble being honest about my emotional state without burdening well people.
I know, you take off the sick person. That's just good life advice. And also, how?
I need another book. If you have suggestions, drop me a line. And a lot of this advice broadly applies to life, right?
Mm-hmm. It also feels like the kind of advice where you're going to get 90% of the way there just by thinking about it before you open your dumb mouth.
In that particular instance,
yeah.
A little later in a chapter on what to do after the death, Tisdale writes, "If you're not sure what to do with a dead body, don't start with a funeral home. Start with the Funeral Consumers Alliance, a national organization with clear, concise information and suggestions intended to help people get what they want at a fair price." I feel like if there's one piece of advice in this book we should all walk away with, it's that. Start with Funeral Consumers Alliance, not with the funeral home. There are some funny bits in this book.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take your word for it.
They have that sort of dark humor you might expect from somebody in her position. Tisdale writes, "One of the good physicians with whom I work keeps a cartoon on her office door. The doctor is talking to a patient, gowned and barefoot, sitting on an exam table. You've got 6 months, but with aggressive treatment, we can help make that seem much longer."
That is so dark.
Tisdale tells a good story, or she lets other people tell their stories, but she chooses well. They're illustrative and well-written and powerful. There are a couple of paragraphs in here about the death of Scott Nearing. He was an economist and a pacifist and an educator. Tisdale quotes his wife. In a chapter called Last Weeks, she writes, "He was bedridden and had little strength, but spoke with me daily. In the morning of August 24th, 1983, 2 weeks after his 100th birthday, when it seemed he was slipping away, I sat beside him on his bed. We were quiet together, no interruptions, no doctors or hospitals. I said, 'It's all right, Scott. Go right along.' And then, with no quiver or pain or disturbance, he said, 'All right,' and breathed slower and slower and slower till there was no movement anymore, and he was gone, out of his body, as easily as a leaf drops from the tree in autumn, slowly twisting and falling to the ground." And that story messed me up the first time I read that.
Yeah, I bet it did.
Just sitting there at breakfast, just being like, oof. If you believe that you are going to die someday, or that you know somebody else who might, this book will give you some insight into that process and help you on your way. It's the advice of a palliative care nurse wrapped in the words of an award-winning author. It's Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them by Sally Tisdale.
This is book 3.
My next recommendation is A Fine and Private Place by Peter S. Beagle. Some people might recognize the author's name from his book, The Last Unicorn.
Sure.
That's considered one of the best fantasy novels of all time.
That book has been on my TBR since, I don't know, I was 10.
Maybe you should read it.
Yeah, maybe I should.
This book was published in 1960 and is also beloved. It's been translated into 10 languages, and every decade or so, a new edition is published. A spiffy new version was just released on October 1st. The story is about a man who's dropped out of society to make his home in an abandoned mausoleum in a vast cemetery. His best friends are a talking raven, 2 ghosts who fall in love, and an eccentric security guard.
I'm already in.
Yeah, right? So I read that flap copy, and I was expecting a whimsical story filled with cemetery hijinks.
Especially given the Peter Beagle Last Unicorn kind of vibe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't that.
You're not there, huh?
It was 100% not that.
Okay.
This book is a meditation on life and death and how we do or don't make peace with how it all works out.
Wow.
Uh-huh. I had a tough time reading this one. Not because I didn't like it. It's beautifully written, and the time invested in the characters is worth it. But for the past, I don't know, decade or so.
Yeah.
Since my mid-40s. Thoughts about death hijack my mind at really inconvenient moments.
Sure.
And like intellectually, I can say, I know there's no light without the dark, and awareness of our impending doom makes the good moments even more precious. And yes, that's all true, of course. But it's also impossible if I think about that all the time. Like you can't function if you're constantly in that fully aware state. And this book, in the guise of a nice man trying to find peace, forced me to confront that bittersweet, fleeting nature of life over and over the whole time I was reading the book. And sometimes it felt like way too much. But as I've gotten more distance from the reading experience, I do recommend it. And I realize I'm making it sound really heavy, and the book really isn't, but my reaction to it was very intense.
It rattled your cage.
It did. Rattled my mort safe. So here we go.
Yeah.
The heart of the story is Jonathan Rebick. Everyone calls him Rebick. He had been a pharmacist, but a series of things went very wrong. And for 20 years, he's lived in the Yorkchester Cemetery in the Bronx. He's hiding out, really. Alive, but not really living.
Hiding from his past deeds, from life in general?
Both. Yes.
Okay.
Rebick can see the ghosts of people who have recently passed.
Oh.
He talks to them, and he helps get them oriented to their new state of being. Sometimes they play chess together. And at some point, the ghosts gently, slowly fade away as they loosen their tethers to the earthly world. He doesn't come out and say it, but he is lonely. He makes connections to people, and then they literally drift away.
Yeah.
He gets his news of the outside world from a talking raven. The raven also brings him food that he's stolen from people on the street.
The raven feels sorry for him.
The raven's kind of mean.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The human characters in the book all lean toward thoughtful and maybe a little melancholy. The raven is a rascal. He's gotten adept at swiping sandwiches in Bologna. And when Rebick wishes that he had a steak, the raven says, 19 years ago, you'd been sloppily thankful for a pretzel. Now you want me to bring you steaks. All the butchers on this last frontier of civilization know me now. I'm going to have to start raiding Washington Heights pretty soon. Another 20 years, if we live that long, I'll have to ferry it across from Jersey.
That's funny.
The raven brings some much needed levity to the whole situation. Yeah. And sometimes he's a little blunt and insightful, borderline mean. But as the other characters get a little dreamy, he kind of brings them back down to reality. One day, a new ghost shows up. His name is Michael. He was a teacher. At his funeral, we see his wife weeping over his grave. And Michael's first moments as he realizes that he has died. And Michael says, my body is there. All my chicken dinners and head scratching and sneezing and fornication and hot baths and sunburns and beer and shaving, all buried and forgotten. All the little pettinesses washed away. I feel clean and light and pure. He thought about book hunting on 4th Avenue and decided that he felt like a smashed light bulb. Goodbye, he said to his body, and walked away down the paved road. He wanted to whistle and felt cheated when he found he could not.
That's nice.
That's a whole lot right there.
Yeah.
The not whistling thing is not the only thing Michael finds frustrating. He has a hard time letting go of the human world. And eventually, we learn that his death was more complicated than we thought.
Oh.
Soon after that, a young girl named Laura arrives. In life, she was a bookseller, and I liked her a lot. She's a little sassy. She has less reticence about moving on to the spirit world, and that causes a little conflict between her and Michael at first. And then they fall in love. Their emotions upset Rebick's quiet situation. He's been hiding out, saying goodbye to the ghost and kind of bumbling through his life.
Right.
And then a widow starts to visit the cemetery, and everything gets even more complicated. This is a very talky book. Not much happens. I mean, everybody's dead.
Yes.
So if you need plot, this might not be for you. There is forward momentum. And all of the characters at the end up in a little bit of an action-adventure situation.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
But it's mostly found family reckoning with what it means to be alive, how to make the most of the time we have in our different seasons of life. It's called A Fine and Private Place by Peter S. Beagle.
Book 4.
My next book is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders.
Modern classic?
Some say, yeah. I suspect you've heard of this and maybe even read it. And if you haven't, I'm here to gently nudge this into your hands. This is experimental literature. If there's any single descriptor that might make me second guess reading a book, it's the word experimental.
I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah.
But also, Jane Austen's novels might have been considered a little experimental when they came out because of the way she did point of view.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this book might find its way onto a shelf with If on a Winter's Night a Traveler or Finnegan's Wake or Infinite Jest. But also, this is more approachable than those, and ultimately, I think, a better experience. So let me give you my argument here. Let's start with the author, George Saunders. George Saunders is a good writer, like all of those other guys were, but he is such a good writer that when people who think about books at the New York Times sat down to write a list of the best 100 books of the 21st century, they had him in there 3 times.
Wow.
Yeah. First at 85 for his book Pastoralia, a collection of his short stories, and then again at 54 for 10th of December, another collection of short stories, and then at number 18 for his first novel, this book, Lincoln in the Bardo. When you search for George Saunders, the phrase widespread critical acclaim comes up a lot. Now, is he a wild-eyed, respected, but not very readable author that you might cover in a lit class but never again? I don't know your tastes, but I would say no. His imagination and his writing are playful and interesting and fully on display. George Saunders has a story narrated by a person who plays a caveman at a failing amusement park.
That's awesome.
Yeah. He's got a story where there's a drug that enhances someone's ability to describe an event.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. One of his narrators is a fox.
That's it. I'm in. I'm sold.
Saunders borrows from action and fantasy and sci-fi and maybe a little bit of horror and humor and uses all of that. And also, and I'm not sure why this matters to me, but it does. George Saunders was not always a writer. His bachelor degree is in geophysical engineering. He was a roofer and a doorman. He worked in a slaughterhouse. He's not straight out of a writing program. Presumably, he wanted to tell stories enough that he chased down how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So George Saunders is a good author, and he's worth a try. And if you're skeptical, he's got lots of short stories that you can sort of give a go. Now, this book. What's this Lincoln in the Bardo? What does that even mean? So Act 1 is about Abraham Lincoln and the death of his son, William, mostly. You meet some other characters, and we'll get to that in a second. William died at the age of 11 in 1862, about 9 months into the Civil War. It was devastating for Lincoln. So you've got this backbone of historical fiction. We get stuff that really happened and insights into the people who lived in the times they lived in. But running right next to that, there's also a strong fantasy story. Lincoln in the Bardo is historical, but it's also a ghost story. It is many ghost stories. William goes to the graveyard where he meets other people who are already dead. It's in no way scary. It's fantastical and sometimes funny and frequently heartbreaking, but there's no attempt at a jump scare.
Mm-hmm.
The ghosts that William meet are fascinating, in part because they're richly drawn characters, and you learn about them as you go through the book. Saunders' background as a short story writer really comes across with many of these. Many of the ghosts refuse to recognize that they are dead.
Mm-hmm.
They're also fascinating because they're weird manifestations of who they were in life.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the main characters is described as having, quote, several sets of eyes, all darting to and fro, several noses, all sniffing. He has so many hands that you can't see his body for his eyes, nose, and hands. So this book is historical fiction and it's fantasy, but it's also a coming-of-age book. But that age is death.
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln in the Bardo is about letting go of life, a theme that we've now seen 3 times in 3 books. The word bardo is a Buddhist idea that means a transitional state. It literally means gap. The most famous bardo is the one between death and rebirth, this age and the next. But bardo can also refer to a suspended time in life, maybe a sickness or a time between jobs. There was a global bardo in 2020, for instance. So for most of the novel, we're in the Bardo with William, Abraham Lincoln, and the rest of these ghosts. I should also mention that most of the action happens in one single day. Now, there are 2 more layers of this book that I want to tell you about. One is about how it's written. So, imagine a vast historical library.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've got a historian in the library, and he's writing notes by taking his favorite passages, usually short, from somebody else's book and then cutting and pasting them into his journal. And he's doing that with dozens of books, copying and pasting one paragraph after another until he's got a complete story.
Mm-hmm.
So he's describing a party that way, all of the details, the cake, who was there, what the weather was like, what's the light like. And there are many chapters that are like that. And it sounds like it might be tedious to read, and somehow it's not. I'm not sure how that works. It's done really well. It becomes this sort of pastiche of views and voices and descriptions, and sometimes they agree and sometimes they don't. There's a chapter where none of the writers agree on what the moon looked like on a particular night, for instance. Was it white or yellow, half full? Was it there at all? It's a sort of a fantastic piece of writing. And it turns out many of the references are from actual historical documents, but some are not.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, some are fiction that he created. The last bit that I want to mention about this book is that there is an audiobook. It is lavishly produced. It has 166 narrators.
Holy cow.
Yeah. A lot of that work is done by Nick Offerman and David Sedaris. The cast is just fantastic. So good. And I would say that the audiobook is the way to go. I know we all like books, but in this instance, I found it easier to follow what was happening, and it definitely kept my interest. I found myself more engaged in the story than how it was being told.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
It's an excellent fall book, and if you happen to have access to a cemetery, plan a walk, put this on. I think that's going to be a great experience. Lincoln in the Bardo is emotionally rich and fun to read and has things to say about life then and now and about grief and letting go. I am not nearly the first person to like this book. It won the Booker the year that it came out. Many people put it on the best of the year list, Time, the New York Times, Paste. If you're curious about it, I recommend giving it a try. It's Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders.
Book 5.
My final recommendation is Marina by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. You might recognize that name. He's the author of the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series.
Which you love.
Which I do love and have talked about in previous episodes. This one is YA. It's a coming-of-age story and a procedural mystery, all wrapped up in Gothic trappings. If this book were a person, it would be a mysterious figure sweeping around corners in a luxurious black velvet cloak with a hood. The story is set in the late 1970s in Barcelona, with tendrils that go back to World War II. It features a chilly boarding school, decaying manor house, burnt-out opulent theater, dank sewers, a possibly haunted greenhouse, a spooky photo album, and the reason we're all here, a mist-shrouded cemetery. I should also mention that it rains almost constantly throughout the story, and nearly everything of import happens in the shadows.
I feel like Zaphon had a vision board for what he was going for here.
He did. The Gothic meter was like turned up to 11.
Yeah.
The story opens with a prologue. Our hero, Oscar, is talking to us as a 30-year-old man. He cues up the story we're about to read and ends with these words. We all have a secret buried under lock and key in the attic of our soul. This is mine.
Whoa.
With that, we jump back in time to when Oscar was 15 years old. He was a student at a Barcelona boarding school. The description of the school is fantastic. It has a monumental facade that's more reminiscent of a castle than a school. Its buildings are somber. The swimming pools are enveloped in a ghostly vapor. There are eerily silent gyms and gloomy chapels where images of long-fingered angels grinned in the flickering candlelight. All of that is just on page 2. So,
yeah.
If florid descriptions make you impatient, this might not be the book for you, but I love it.
Yeah.
Oscar is mostly indifferent to his classes and his fellow students, and he has a dreamy romantic side. He bides his time all day until the few hours before dinner, when he can escape out through the school's gate to explore Barcelona's winding alleys in the twilight. He's particularly drawn to a neighborhood with abandoned gardens and crumbling mansions. One day, while looking at a house he describes as rather sinister even for my taste, he hears a beautiful voice singing. He follows the sound through an iron gate, past a moldering fountain, and into the open doors of a sitting room. The song is coming from a gramophone. Next to it sits a gold pocket watch with cracked glass and stopped hands. As Oscar examines the watch, a frightening figure leaps out at him from the gloom. Without thinking, Oscar flees with the watch still in his hand. That accidental theft is the catalyst for everything that follows, including Oscar's introduction to a beautiful young girl named Marina and her father, an artist with a broken heart.
Well, there you go.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to keep going because it's my job. But Marina invites Oscar on a cryptic adventure and leads him to the cemetery. On the last Sunday of every month, at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, a woman dressed in a black cloak arrives by carriage and places a single red rose on an unmarked grave. On this Sunday, the new friends follow the unknown woman from the cemetery, and they are soon caught up in a mystery, tinged with grand love affairs, betrayal, obsession, and sorrow.
That sounds like the beginning of a fine read there.
Mm-hmm. Like The Woman in White, this is a very plotty book. Scenes of found family and really nice domesticity, like dinners around the table and hanging out reading by the firelight, are broken up with white-knuckle action and moments that made the back of my neck tingle. A key scene happens in a greenhouse, and it is nightmare territory. It was so scary. Really unpleasant, but awesome.
All right.
I don't want to give it away, but it was so good.
Okay.
It feels a little bit like the author read Frankenstein and The Island of Dr. Moreau and The Fault in Our Stars, then fell asleep watching Pan's Labyrinth, had a vivid dream, and woke up and wrote it all down.
It sounds like the perfect book for spooky season.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
But I feel like he devised all of the creepy stuff and cliffhanger plot points as tricks to get us to read what he really cares about. And what Carlos Ruiz Zafón really seems to care about is little histories of cursed characters and their exploits. And then he has them say things like this. Do you remember that day when you asked me what was the difference between a doctor and a magician? Well, there is no magic. Our body begins to destroy itself from the moment it is born. We are fragile. We're creatures of passage. All that's left of us are our actions, the good or the evil we do to our fellow humans.
That's really nice.
I know. Right around the time you're like, whoa, it's so spooky. Then they slap you in the face with some emotions.
Yeah, that's how they do it. tricksy little writers.
Yep. You know how in mystery stories you can meet a character who only exists to provide a key piece of information and then the story just moves on without them?
Sure.
In this book, even the side characters have fully rendered histories, and all of them contribute to unraveling the mystery of the woman in the cemetery with the rose. So someone you meet early on who you think isn't going to matter,
Right.
Yeah, they come back later
Oh.
and they get a whole thing. It's so good. This book is melodramatic and melancholy. It's a big adventure and a warm story of found family. It will transport you to a pleasingly crumbling version of Barcelona and an unforgettable Gothic cemetery. Carlos Ruiz Zafón said that of all the books he's written, this is one of his favorites. It's Marina.
Those are 5 books we love set in the cemetery. We are finishing up season 6 soon. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please think about joining our Patreon. We are primarily supported by listeners like you. If you want us to be around for season 7, please consider $3 a month. You can find out more at strongsenseofplace.com/support. This is a reminder to visit our show notes at strongsenseofplace.com for links and details about stuff we have in the show. We'll show you the Mary Cemetery in Romania. We'll show you a hairpin of a woman who lived during the Ice Age.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I found a bunch of awesome video tours of the beautiful historic cemeteries that I talked about in my 101.
Are some of those walking tours where you'll be able to sort of simulate walking through the cemetery?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's fun. Mel, where are we headed for our next episode?
We're indulging in fresh ocean air and the grunge scene in Seattle.
Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
I don't have much time. I am being transported by the Ecclesiad vessel Merkava to stand trial for heresy of the highest order. But I will not renounce my work, and to my last breath I will speak the truth of this plague-ridden world, that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The Heresies of Red Off Buntwine, Chapter 2, coming May 1st.